So welcome to our session. You are here for Confidence in Chaos, Strategies for World-Class Security Operations. My name is Catherine Nerler, and I've been in the security field for close to 30 years. That's a long time. I got my start at one of the first incident response and analysis teams in the United States. That group was responsible for the first intrusion detection software, the first centralized patch management, and for helping to organize what is now FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response Teams, back in the day. Fast forwarding, because you probably don't want to hear all of it. Today, I am working for MITRE. MITRE is a not-for-profit company, and we are striving to solve problems and give back to the community by solving challenging problems. Some of the things that we provided include CVE, which is the Common Vulnerabilities Enumeration. We have CWE, and then most recently, ATT&CK. So ATT&CK is a way of describing TTPs and adversary movement. So that's what we've been doing lately. My role is as a department manager in cybersecurity assessments in our Cyber Innovation Center. And basically, I'm responsible for evolving and fixing state-of-the-art for security assessments. So we're doing things like the security automation framework and some other things like that. Hand it over to Carson.
Hey folks, my name is Carson Zimmerman. I've been working in security operations for about 20 years now. Most of that was at MITRE, where I worked in various government security operations centers and doing a bunch of other fun work I'm not going to talk about today. And for the last 6 years or so, I've been at Microsoft. I lead one of the teams that performs security incident investigations in the cloud, and I'm really excited to talk to you about our book today.
And our third partner, I have to mention, is Ingrid Parker. She's the senior manager for intelligence at Red Canary. Ingrid also worked for MITRE. That's our common thread together. And in addition to all her technical and writing that she contributed, she also helped keep us on task during shifting times, during COVID and all those things. So we're thankful to Ingrid, who couldn't be here with us today. So the thing we're going to be talking about today is actually a book. It's freely available. It's on the MITRE website, and Carson will talk more about how to get it, but it's a pretty hefty read if you're tired at night. So we're looking forward to that. We actually have a couple of them here that we might be able to do something with at the end here if we have time. So that work is based on our thoughts. So I like to think about technology as shifting, constantly shifting, moving around, kind of like sand dunes, right? So you can't, just when you get your grip on it, things move on you. And that's a lot of what we have to deal with in security operations. So basically, we're operating in a shifting landscape all the time in security operations. You heard this morning about cloud, an awesome development when it comes to security. You can now secure these environments and control them and constantly patch and do all of those things. For security operations, when those first rolled out, some of us were blind. We could no longer see where data was in these environments because we didn't own them. And we didn't own the way of monitoring or anything else. So it became a challenge for us. And so we've had to figure out in security operations, how do you keep things moving in these dynamic environments? And so we've come up with some organizing principles. There are 11 strategies, basically. Each one is a chapter in this book that can help you to figure out how to organize your security operations and how to be just that more effective, knowing that your technology is just going to keep changing forever. So today, on our time frame, we're going to go over 6 of these strategies. We're going to talk about the first one, knowing what you have. The third one, which is about the SOC structure itself. The fourth one, which is about growing and hiring your staff. The sixth one, which is about cyber threat intelligence. 7, which is all about your data. And 8, which is about the tools and bringing things together more effectively in your security environments. Okay, so with that, we'll jump right into the strategies themselves, try to give you all the content we can in the limited time we have. The first one we have is about knowing what you're protecting and why. This is arguably the most important of all of our strategies. It threads through everything, right? So if you don't know what you have, you can't know how to monitor it, you can't know how to protect it, and it won't work out for you. Be curious about what your organization is, meaning what is the business that you do? What are your missions? What is your intellectual property? Where is it? Do you do e-transactions? What are all the different things you do in your environment? And then from there, what can you do about it, right? For monitoring and designing and detecting and even preventing when you can. So have a business mindset. Literally, when I first started, security operations tended to be in the basement. So it's metaphorically, you're in the dark, right? There's no room, there's no windows, there's no nothing, you're in the dark. You don't have to be in the dark today. It's much, much different now to be able to talk to your businesses and talk to your business units, mission units, to know more about your organization. And most of all, importantly, asset inventories. I can't say it enough about have an asset inventory. Now, traditionally, security operations don't maintain an asset inventory, right? So you got to make friends with the IT organization if you're not within the IT organization. And you got to partner with them. And I'll tell you a story. I got the call. I was on incident response, and I was the one on call. And I got the phone call that all incident responders dread, that someone from outside of your organization is telling you you've been hacked. That's my favorite. And then, so I took down the information that they had about, the system and the organization and all that I could, everything I could know. And then I went, and we didn't have it in any of our inventories or monitoring or anything else. And guess what? Neither did IT. So those that were doing the asset inventory had no record of the IP address or anything else. Well, 8 hours later, if you were hearing about timing this morning, 8 hours is a long time when you're doing incident response, a long time to not know where something is, where in the world, literally, this machine was. So we eventually found it. Long story short, it was a research organization that had set up this rogue little network and not told IT and certainly not told security operations. So my moral of the story is keep a really good asset inventory or work with the IT organization and help them to be successful. If they're underfunded, tell them they need more money. And also keep track of information like where it is, the physical location of the device. And that means virtual too. Just because it's virtual doesn't mean it's not physically somewhere, right? And then the business owners or the data owner or the system owner. So you can contact people when you need to. So that's my story on assets. Over to Carson.
I'm going to talk about number 3 here. You need to build an organization, a structure for your SOC that meets the needs of your customers, your constituency, the people you're defending. And there's a lot of ways to break this down. When we actually wrote the book here, the second edition of 10 strategies, we called 11 strategies, we actually took the inventory we had from before and from first.org's inventory of different functions the Security Operations Center can provide to its constituents. And we actually came up with 41. And I actually recommend none of you do all of those 41. Instead, you need to think about from that menu what's going to be right for you. And you can see here this cartoon. We talk about SOCs of different sizes. Everything from 2 people in their basement doing this part-time to sprawling several 100,000 analyst national coordination centers. So we think about that menu and we lay it across these different organizations. And I'll talk about this in a few minutes, but no 2 SOCs are organized exactly the same. So one of our major points here is that a world-class SOC is one that excels at the things it's chartered to do and it doesn't try to do everything. We touch on a couple topics here, including the location of that SOC and remote work. Through COVID, almost all of us, I would bet, worked from home, at least somewhat. So the notion that you have to be in one physical location isn't necessarily true anymore. So we see them come in all different shapes and sizes there as well. 24/7. Some people say, oh, if you're not 24/7, you're not really an ops center. Well, maybe. Maybe you're using outsourcing to achieve some of that. Chances are you're using asymmetric staffing. In fact, I don't think I've ever run into a SOC that had just as many people on shift at 3 a.m. as they did 3 p.m. Putting that one chair of 24/7 is expensive. That's 4.8 full-time equivalents. That's expensive. So we want to think about different approaches there. And then outsourcing. I've come in contact with outsourcing all sorts for folks all across the spectrum here. We all have staffing problems. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Let's drill down on some of these pieces. If there's something I've learned over the years, is that the further the analyst is from what they're monitoring, physically, organizationally, geographically, et cetera, the poorer their understanding is what is normal, and therefore their ability to understand what is abnormal on those networks, systems, cloud assets, et cetera. Back to strategy one. So what that means for us is that on the one hand, we want to be big. We want to have a consolidated SOC for a huge, sprawling enterprise. We consolidate our authorities, our resources. We sustain that cadre of experts in this area. But on the other hand, we want to be small. We want to maintain that visibility and that ability to act with relevancy and precision. We want to understand what's going on all those networks. So striking that balance is different for each of us. So the way we did organize things goes back to this piece is how are you going to use one of these different models to serve your constituency? One of the most common ways, not the only, but one of the most common, and one of my top recommendations is if you can get all the elements of security operations for a given portion of your enterprise, if not the whole thing, under one roof, virtually or physically, under one person, it generally works out the best. You want one team oriented on one mission. You want trust and camaraderie and unity of effort between these folks. Your incident triage, your response, analysis, hunting, CTI, architecture of the SOC tools, operating and maintaining those SOC tools, and communicating and all that situational awareness. All those pieces of security operations, you want them under one roof to support these things, because when you respond, you want economy of force and unity of effort. And you want that shared situational awareness across all of those organizations, both in peacetime and during a major incident. Drilling down further, let's talk about the engineering piece. I've been an engineer embedded in SOCs for 20 years. And I'm here to tell you with the most recent buzzwords, something I've held true for that whole time, is that you need those operators and those engineers talking to each other every day. In some cases, those may be the exact same team. There's different ways to achieve this. However you achieve this, what you want are the patterns and not the anti-patterns shown on this slide. You don't want us versus them. You don't want solutions and requirements thrown over brick walls. Every single time I see a SOC with an engineering organization over here, organizationally, and ops over here, meaning they're very disparate, it is awful for everyone, every single time. So think about how are you going to bring these operators and these engineers together? Sometimes that means they are, in fact, the same team, exactly. There's one SOC I've run into, the people who operate, maintain, and evolve their bespoke SIEM are the same people that do alert triage, right, wrong, and indifferent. There's different models here. One way or another, you can think about ops owns engineering, you can think about the engineering resources being matrixed into ops. Maybe you have a rotation. One way or another, you need someone in that operations center tracking and driving those requirements. They say when it's finished. They're making sure that we deliver what we need and when we need it. Off to Catherine for number 4.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to shift gears radically for a minute again, and we're going to talk about hiring and growing your staff, which is our strategy number 4. The thing about staff is that they're challenging. So I'll start. The thing about hiring in a SOC is that it can be counterintuitive. At least I learned it to be counterintuitive over time. So I'll tell a story. Basically, I had a guy that we'll call Rich because he is now rich, and I helped him get rich. He was pretty new in his career when I got him, and I hired him, and he was a superstar, absolute rock star, could do anything technically. And this guy, he went on and he helped our SOC for 2 years. I did everything right. I paid him fair market value. I gave him more money. I gave him raises. I gave him tools. He had 4 monitors where other analysts had only 2. I did everything I could think of to try to keep this guy comfortable and really liking it. After 2 years, he came to me and he told me that he was leaving. And I was absolutely stunned. I thought, okay, well, I've just poured everything I can into this one person and I have an entire staff, and he's leaving me a crater. So the moral of this story is you can do everything right and you're still going to lose people. So what I'm saying is there's an ephemeral nature to hiring and staffing security operations. So that became my model. I just assumed that I think about my hiring with the end in mind. This person is eventually going to leave. And all along the way, I work with the staff on, okay, how do we make it so when this person leaves, there's not a deep crater? So I still look for the technical expertise, but I look for a couple of other things now too when I'm hiring staff for security operations. One of them is curiosity, and you heard that mentioned a couple times this morning, which I was thrilled with. You have to have curiosity if you're in this environment. Just because you're technically brilliant, if you're just sitting there and you're not thinking about, wow, that's kind of weird, I really wonder what that is. If you don't have those kind of people on your team, you're not going to get very far because adversaries like to do subtle things and move around without you noticing them. So curiosity is important. The other important thing is teamwork. Teamwork. So when I'm talking to someone to come on the staff, I look for that person who wants to explain to me how they figured something out. I'm looking for the enthusiasm that someone likes to share. Hey, this is how I figured it out. Hey, can you see that? And teaches others, right? Those are the ones you want on your team doing teamwork. So as they get ready to leave, they've taught some other team members, more junior or less experienced, how to do what they're doing. So those are really great things to have. Ephemeral nature of staffing. That's what I got to say about that. The next one I want to talk about is cyber threat intelligence, which is all the rage today. I know everybody's doing this now. And basically, there's some tricks that come with cyber threat intelligence. The first thing I want to talk about are the 3 areas that you need to have to come together to do great cyber threat intelligence or useful and actionable cyber threat intelligence. The first one is what we all think about, and that's about adversaries. So you have your TTPs, you have your motivations, you have your behaviors, you've had what they do in the past, you have all of that kind of stuff. The next one is the technical environment. What is your environment? Are you all cloud? Do you have Linux systems? Do you have Microsoft? What is your vulnerability profile? Are you able to patch things? All of those things feed into what your technical environment is. And the next thing is relevancy. So this is about what is it do you do? That's important, Are you a bottled water company that has intellectual property on how bottles are made, from recycling? Or are you an electrical distribution company? The threats may look different, and probably do. And that brings me to all of these data feeds that you can now purchase, right? My words there are someone else's data may not be yours. It may be, but it may also not be. So really you need to look at these 3 things in your environment and look at the actions that come at the intersection of those 3 things coming together. Okay. I also wanted to talk about anticipating adversaries. This is the holy grail of using cyber threat intelligence in SOCs. I don't know if you all have experienced this, but I've had executives come to me and say, okay, if I buy this cyber threat intelligence feed, are you going to be able to tell me the threats before I get to them? I would love that too. That is not the case, as it turns out, but we can come closer if we start looking at things that are outside of just the TTPs. Looking at your adversaries' behaviors, because they tend to want to hide. So this is where that curiosity is really good from your staff members of, that's kind of weird. But it's also looking at your TTPs in context of other information. So for example, if your adversaries are looking at your intellectual property, again, back to the recycled bottling intellectual property, that's one kind of person. If your folks are looking at financial, like e-transactions or your payroll, that's a different kind of adversary, potentially, right? So it's putting together some of those pieces and thinking about your adversaries. It is well worth your time and money to spend a little bit of time in security operations to look for your adversaries and think about them in bigger contexts other than just your TTPs. Okay, and I'm going to hand it back over to Carson.
So the next one is all about data. Let me ask you all a question. When you ask your analysts what data they want to collect, what do they say? Everything, right? And then you ask them, how long are you going to store it for? What do they say? Forever, right? Can we do that? Absolutely not. Thinking about it for a while, I actually came up with a graph you see here, where on the x-axis you have the amount of data, usually volume, velocity, veracity, all the V's. And on the y-axis you have the value. And what I've seen time and again is we're either under or overutilizing our collection platform. On the left-hand side, you're not working to its value. On the right-hand side, the goodness is lost in the volume. In fact, I would argue you collect too much, the value of all of it goes to zero eventually if you're totally overloaded your analysts. So the question for you is how are you going to get to that peak? We'll talk about that in a second. But along the way, so we want to align our sources and our retention with our priorities. The days of saying that all of the data that the analysts are going to use go into the SIM are over. Now, mind you, folks, I've clocked thousands of hours in front of SIM products. I was a champion for buying a bunch of them in the early 2000s. You still need a SIM or something like it. I'll show you how in a few minutes. But the point is that we want to think about also using data in place. We also think about, look, it's beyond just endpoint or just network now, right? The days of slapping a network IDS on it and calling it monitor are also kind of over. Should we still use network monitoring in places? Yeah, probably. But in an environment where you've got more and more cloud, there is no endpoint for you to monitor. So this is forcing the SOC to have to address issues it kind of kicked the can down on the road on for years. We want to measure that coverage along not just one, but 4 dimensions. Our organizations, our businesses. Go back to that first strategy. We use our asset inventory, our composite asset inventory, to form our denominator. And we measure everything else we do in what the security operations does against that denominator, both during this piece as well as incident response. Hey, how many things have been mitigated? Have we reached some acceptable percentage? At any rate, we think about the technology type, Linux, Windows, et cetera, the height of the computing stack, firmware, base OS, applications, et cetera. And then finally, and it's a MITRE presentation, so we have to use the word attack at least once, right, Catherine? Okay. We're going to also monitor legitimately actually against our attack or our kill chain coverage. Now, how do we do this? Here's another way to think about it. We have our actionable alerts, we have our contextual data. For every alert, we need contextual data to understand, is it true positive, false positive, something we just need to be worried about, something we're not. Sounds obvious, right? For every telemetry source we collect, we should also think about having alerts. Now I know you're like, duh, but time and again, we don't do this. We collect raw telemetry, we don't generate any alerts, and then when something bad happens, the system owners are like, you didn't do your jobs. Well, sir, we didn't create detections for that because we didn't have that agreement. Set those expectations up front, folks. Conversely, all too often, we get alerts from something really shiny. We don't have the contextual data. What are we gonna do? We don't know. So here's a little Venn diagram that talks about some of those different pieces. Volume of data goes from really big to really low as you move from left to right. So the point is providing one without the other gives the illusion of coverage. You need both. Number 8, leverage tools to support workflow. So we were gathering all that data, we're bringing it into the SOC. And here's something I see happen really often. We have all this cool technology. We spent millions of dollars, maybe on our SIM. And we're like, ooh, shiny. And then we go buy more and more technology. And then it gets put on a shelf for 3 years, the period of the maintenance contract. And then when at the end of 3 years, we're like, that's garbage. We're going to throw it away. It's happened to everybody? Anybody here? Yeah? Yeah. Good times, right? Bad news. Obviously, we need to practice continual evolution of that tech over its entire lifetime. And for you and I, that means, generally speaking, building those alerts, those analytics, those use cases that apply to your business. Again, back to strategy 1. And you don't just have to do it yourselves. Spoiler alert, I'll tell you how in a few minutes. Now, and then you need to integrate that into one coherent workflow. The way you do that can look way different depending on your needs. Maybe you need a SIM, maybe you don't. Maybe you need an ER, maybe you don't. It depends on what your mix is. What you want to think about is having a picture that looks something like this. Some of those blocks for you might be missing, some of them might not be. This picture looks different for everybody. The point is you've got some of your event data flowing into some stuff. Maybe it's a SIM, maybe it's not. Maybe it's big data, maybe it's not. Maybe you've got a sword, maybe you don't. But the point is that you're bringing the data that's most important to you into an architecture, and you're alerting on it, and then your analyst can pivot between that, your case management or your SOAR or whatever have you, your threat management platform, and maybe your asset platform. There is no single pane of glass, folks. There's not. What there is a curated set of tools that you need to have some interoperability between them so that your analysts are pivoting between them seamlessly. Some of the best analysts I've ever run into were so good, not because they knew how to write great queries, so they did. I like to write some really long ones myself. It's not because they were free of analytic bias, so that's true as well. What made them so good is that they were able to find and leverage other data lakes that belong to others while using the data in place. Some of the best SOCs I've run into, despite their fancy cloud-based SIEMs, had less than 10% or even less than 1% of their total data estate under their own control, meaning 90 or perhaps even 99% of the data they used on a daily basis belonged to someone else. That's so powerful because they could achieve just those couple detections and just those couple analytic use cases without having to pay to put it in their own data architecture. Food for thought. At the same time, when we build this architecture, we have a balancing act. On the one hand, we can be completely open. All the SOC tools are in the same identity plane, same network, fully integrated, et cetera, as the rest of the constituency. Now, what happens when your main domain gets broken into? Can you trust the SOC's data anymore? Not necessarily. So on the other hand, you can have a completely closed architecture. I've actually lived in SOCs like this, where you can think of the SOC as a black hole of data. An event horizon forms around it. Light goes in and never comes out. Is that beneficial? You've got problems with that too. So somewhere in between these two extremes, you need to find that balance. Because when you find that balanced approach, it also enables the SOC, and I'm doing a little spoiler alert here to one of our other strategies, is you can actually deputize some of your most important business stakeholders. Hey, they're asking you for 23 different detections that you need to write by Friday. Why not have them help you write them? And they might do a better job than you can. So you can find a way, if you build that architecture right, with the right integrations of bringing those other folks in. It can be very powerful. I digress. So for those of you taking pictures of these slides as we move along, you didn't have to. You can download this whole thing for free at MITRE.org, WAC 11 strategies. As I mentioned earlier, I let slip. I wrote 10 strategies in about 2013, 2014, and the three of us were inspired to update it. So it's not just one new strategy, folks. It's actually 3 and 120 new pages of material. And we wrote a whole lot more. You can do this on print on demand or EPUB. That's going to cost you money. The PDF is totally free. And just to be clear, folks, I don't make a dime on this. Catherine doesn't make a dime on this, and neither does Ingrid, and neither does MITRE. It's actually free. So when you're paying money for the EPUB or print on demand, that doesn't go to us, trust me. I'm also required to tell you that we're not speaking on behalf of our employers, past or present, and that this work was put together under public funding. So with that, I will close with a couple quotes for you. Now here you see it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. That was the Red Queen talking to Alice and through the looking glass. This quote inspired the concept of the Red Queen effect. You have to keep evolving your capabilities to actually keep parity with your adversary in your changing environment, just as Catherine talked about in the introduction. So think about maintaining your capabilities actually falling behind. You need to be constantly evolving. The second thing I'll offer you is a quote by Williams Gibson. The future has already arrived. It's not just evenly distributed yet. People often ask me, Carson, what does the next generation security operations center look like? And sometimes I'll respond and say, it's your job, our job, all of us, to provide that set of capabilities, all 11 strategies, and whatever of those 41 functions we talked about, to your whole constituency. So think about measuring that and driving that to as close to 100% as you think you can manage. So with that, we're going to take questions. I'm going to park it here on the 11 strategies.